I give you Chip and Ruby.
Thank you. Thank you. So appreciate the introduction. And I so appreciate being able to share a bit of our life together, Ruby and I, with you. We're honored that you would allow us into your hearts and your minds and allow us to share, what we've seen, what we've personally seen, but what we've also personally been involved in. And it is an honor, I must say. I'm going to put up on the screen some slides for everyone as we begin. And what I'd love to do is just really help, everyone to understand tonight as, Ruby and I share, we're not claiming to be some experts or, this kingdom center of excellence that all answers come through us. But we just are going to share our story. And Ruby and I have both been Christians since 1986. So that's 35 years. And so combined, we have 70 years of experience. And, that gives us just some great insight into life, into Christian life, relationships, and things of that nature. And so that's what we're really going to pull from as we shared tonight. And, our whole theme is it's just about honoring God with your life. You read the Bible, especially when you start talking about dating and things like that. The Bible has a really disastrous course in what not to do when you think of relationships in the Bible. It is really a tragic story, but there's much to learn from that. And Ruby and I, when we think about relationships, we think about ours, when we think about how to build great relationships, romantic relationships in particular, the thing that stuck out to us more than anything is honoring God with your life. And my wife and I sat and we chatted, and we have a video that we want to show you before we begin. It is a clip from the movie. I think it was the 80s. Is that right, babe? Maybe the 80s. Entitled Officer and a Gentleman. And the whole backdrop of the story is that there was this naval academy where men would come in, they trained to become officers, and where this place was in a small town, and the women in that area were always trying to snatch up an officer because of, if they graduate the academy, they become an officer, and what that means for their life, and it'll be beautiful and wonderful. And Richard Gere plays one of the gentlemen, and this is at the end of the movie, and this girl had been pursuing him, and he first has an interaction because he thought her motives were false and not really wanting him, and you'll get the gist of it. Well, there you go. They ride off into the sunset. And there we are. We too, an officer and a gentleman. She snagged her officer. That's Ruby and I 2 weeks ago on the beach in Jamaica. We too living that dream. We got to tell you, Hollywood really has done a terrible job of portraying romance and relationships and how things work out. You know, you look at that movie, and here they are, Richard Gere is carrying Paula off, and her friend is clapping for her because those two were scheming to find an officer, but Paula really fell in love and found love. But the whole movie is riddled with lies, deceit. His best friend took his life because he was trying to date Paula's friend, and he really fell in love with her. But Paula was only in love with the idea of him becoming an officer and graduating the academy, and he quit the academy. And when he went and told her that he quit the academy, wanted to marry her because she lied and said she was pregnant with a child, and she wasn't. And when he told her he quit, she was like, "What? Do you not realize it's the only reason why I was with you?" And it broke his heart. He went to a motel and hung himself. That, you know, these stories are riddled with, that story was riddled with falsehoods and lies, but yet Hollywood paints this picture that's just not real. And, you know, you can see Ruby and I, we've been married now for 25 years. And you see us, you go, "Oh, wow, look at that." Well, you know, you didn't go through anything. You didn't, you know, you don't know, you don't understand. Well, we stand on the shoulders of many challenging scenarios that have brought us this far. And so Ruby's going to read this first text that really sets the stage for what we believe is the foundational principles for building great relationships.
1 Corinthians 3:10-17. By the grace God has given me, I laid a foundation as a wise builder, and someone else is building on it. But each one should build with care, for no one can lay any foundation other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ. If anyone builds on this foundation using gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, or straw, their work will be shown for what it is, because the day will bring it to light. It will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of each person's work. If what has been built survives, the builder will receive a reward. If it burns up, the builder will suffer loss, but yet will be saved, even though only as one escaping through the flames. Do you want me to go on? Do you not know that you yourselves are God's temple and that God's spirit dwells in your midst? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy that person. For God's temple is sacred, and you together are that temple.
You know, my wife, when we were talking, she said, "You know, honey, it's about precious stones." And, you know, this passage here, we see, you know, Paul talking about the foundation is Christ, and then he uses an earthly example to really accent that point. And he talks about 3 different building materials: gold, silver, and costly stones. And then he says wood, hay, and straw. And on this image, you know, gold, silver, and diamonds are costly stones. You know, fire doesn't destroy them. It refines them, it purifies them so that they can be fashioned into whatever the sculptor desires. But wood, straw, and hay, when fire hits it, it destroys it. And it is no longer useful. Matter of fact, it's even forgotten, because every piece of the wood, hay, or straw is burned up. And when you think about building relationships, because the Bible doesn't talk about dating and things like that, it really doesn't go into it at all. I mean, people are betrothed, we can do that. There's a lot of texts on that. But it does talk about whatever we do, we honor God, and we do it with costly stones. We use gold, silver, or these precious stones so that when the temperature heats up, it doesn't consume it. That's how we do it. We honor God. Rubes, you want to read 1 Samuel?
Sure. 1 Samuel 2, verses 30 through 33. Therefore, the Lord, the God of Israel, declares, I promised that members of your family would minister before me forever. But now the Lord declares, far be it from me. Those who honor me, I will honor, but those who despise me will be disdained. The time is coming when I will cut short your strength and the strength of your priestly house, so that no one in it will reach old age. 32, and you will see distress in my dwelling. I'm sorry, and you will see distress in my dwelling. Although good will be done to Israel, no one in your family line will ever reach old age. Every one of you that I do not cut off from serving at my altar, I will spare only to destroy your sight and sap your strength, and all your descendants will die in the prime of life.
You know, this is a pretty powerful text because he's talking in reference to Eli and his boys. And he talks about this idea of honoring God, of if you honor him, he will honor you. And we have to be willing to recognize that every choice we make, everything we do, whether it's a career choice, whether it's a job change, whether it's a move, whether it's a purchase, whether it's a relationship, whatever we do, God is expecting that the choices we make bring honor to him. And in this particular passage, you know, Eli's sons, they fell prey to not honoring God in two areas. The first area was they would take sacrifices that they saw the choice meat and the goods that were being sacrificed, and they took the things that were really good for themselves. So they were selfishly motivated and they took things for themselves. The second thing they did was that they saw these women and they were pleasing to them. They saw that these were beautiful women. And so they were adulterous with these women. So, you know, they found themselves in this, I'm not going to be sacrificial and I'm not going to restrain myself from physical pleasure. And they died for that. And God even gives a strong warning about generations to come, because this wasn't about dating. It was about this disposition that the choices that they were making did not bring honor to God. That's a principle that should guide all of our lives. We've got one more passage, and then Ruby's going to share some things from her story that I think will be very helpful. In Philippians, go ahead, babe, chapter 4, verse 8.
Yes, Philippians 4, 8 through 9. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you.
I mean, this is such a powerful passage because he's not given some cookie cutter answer to life. He's not given do this and do that and don't do this. He's saying, no, what we must do as Christians is we have to think whatever is true, whatever is true, whatever is, you know, the truth about God, purity, and whatever is noble, nobility. What is noble? These are the things I must consider. Whatever is right, whatever is pure, notice this, the words lovely, admirable. And then he says, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, this is the context through which we must consider our lives in the choices that we make. That's with the way we eat, the way we exercise, the way we we love one another, the way we worship, the way we build relationships in our discipling, whatever, in our marriage, in our parenting, in dating, whatever this is the backdrop. These are some of the precious stones that are built on Christ, that are foundational for choices that we make. And this is how you begin to pull together your ability to navigate through this world as a Christian. And this covers every area, including dating. What is noble? What is right? What is pure? What is lovely? What is admirable? What is excellent and praiseworthy? He said, think about these things. I mean, that's what he wants us to meditate on. That is what he wants our heart to find God in, so that we make choices that bring honor to God. Now, when we look at this, Ruby and I have come up with 4 basic building blocks that we want to use in our story. And we did this thing where we said the story of us, right? Well, our story had pre-stories that led to us. You know, when we're standing there on the beach, that wasn't how it began. It didn't begin like that at all. Matter of fact, when we first were married, the first 6 months, I remember my wife saying, I can see how marriage goes to physical blows. We were driving in the car. We were both interns. We were going to a leaders meeting. We were on 95 and we were having a tiff, an argument, and I'm in the car driving, and she's like, well, I don't want to, do this with you. You're not. I said, well, do you want to get out? And I was telling her, you can get out here on 95 if you want, and I'll leave you. I mean, just terrible things that were at the early part of our marriage, but God worked. And these 4 principles that we would like to share with you helped us to govern. But this is not just for our relationship, because Ruby and I had other dating relationships. You know, I had to really think, but I forgot when I first became a Christian, I was dating a non-Christian for about 7 or 8 months. I forgot all about that. It was 35 years ago, but that's what I was doing. So we're going to share on 4 areas that we think are key for building relationships. One is purpose in life. The second is value what God values. Yoke yourself correctly is the third. And the final is stewardship of your heart. So my wife's going to share her story, a portion of her story with the concept of purpose in life.
So thank you, honey, for setting this up. It is great to be able to share these things. It has been a long time, but I became a Christian at 25. And already I'd had so many relationships in the world with different guys, different whatever, very, very promiscuous, if you will. All of those relationships were probably sexual, as well as, thinking I'm looking for the right one. And so when I studied the Bible at 25, I realized through the scriptures that I could have a pure life. Now, I felt like I had already really made such a mess of my life. How could God ever want me? And so my conversion was very real to me. It was very precious to me. And I got the convictions through studying the Bible about purity, which I thought, how could God ever see me as pure? And that's just a blessing that God gives us. But I do remember early on in my building, really my convictions about dating, is I had my own convictions about purity and righteousness, because I was determined I was not, would not, did not want to go back to the lifestyle that I lived. And so all of my relationships, whether the guy had convictions or not, I had deep convictions about righteousness and purity. I do remember that, whether it came down to kissing or whatever, I was trying to protect myself. But Floyd mentioned in his sharing, when he and his wife did our singles ministry talk about relationships, and he mentioned about a guy that was at work with me who working there as an auditor. He didn't work with us, but he was an auditor at our job, and I worked with Floyd. And this guy was coming on pretty heavy with asking me to go out for drinks or asking me to go out, after work. He was pretty, good looking, if you will, from my standard of what good looking was, and certainly a professional, and that would have turned my head as well. Now, I had shared my faith with Floyd before, and he wasn't very interested in the Bible, but nonetheless, I got this account from Floyd, because after he became a Christian, he's the one, I went back and said, Floyd, what did you see? And he reminded me about the guy, the auditor, who was insistent that I, go out with him, was flirting or whatever, and then I didn't. What Floyd did not know is that my heart was, who would know? And I'm just going to go, because drinks are just drinks. We're not, I'm just going to go and do this. And yet I realized how slippery that slope would be. And I remember literally running away from my job that night to keep from going back and saying yes. And so I was so grateful that he saw that and remembered that example in his mind, but he didn't know the backstory. But the truth of the matter is, women, even though I had deep, deep, deep convictions and made the decision that I would, to stay pure before God, and to practice that everywhere I went, I had no idea that someone was watching me that would later make a decision to become a Christian and be able to tell me the example that I set.
Wow. Well, honey, I know he wasn't as good looking as me.
No, he wasn't. But that's okay.
Well, it's this issue of purpose of life. And I appreciate every time you share the story, Ruth, because, you maintained your purpose in the midst of that outside influence. You wrestled internally. And I love the fact when you share how nobody would know. Mm-hmm. And yet you didn't do it. What was there anything that just triggered you to go, no one will see it, but I'm not going to do it? Was there anything that just said no, or you just?
I was just afraid that if I let myself go there, I would go all the way there. And I had such a past of being, with guys and whatever. I just didn't trust myself. And so the parameters I set were from the standard of God, but I held on to them even when I was struggling. And there was nobody else there that would have known. I could have gone and had this drink with this guy or whatever, but I just felt like if I go there, this may be the thing that turns me away from God. So I just ran away from it. There are other examples that I had, even as I worked in New York City. That's where I met and studied the Bible. And I was working for a publishing firm. And it's interesting, as I start studying the Bible, during that time, there were about 3 different guys that start coming my way, looking for, hinting at, I want to take you out. And one of those was the president of the company I was working for, this publishing firm. Now, we would talk about him behind his back and call him Remington Steele. He was this cool French guy and, whatever, his suits. But when I told him I was leaving the company to go, I was moving to Texas, he asked me out for lunch. And I hadn't studied, I was studying the Bible or just starting to, so I wasn't a Christian. So I went out to lunch with him, and over lunch, this guy proposed that we would have an affair. And I'd never done that before. Now, I thought I was a pretty, kind of worldly type woman, but that's something I'd never done and felt like I didn't ever want to do. And I just remember going to the point, I was studying the Bible. I was still, kind of being attracted to the world and had guys hitting on me. And the decisions I had to make all went back to, I'm studying the Bible. I'm trying to get this right. I don't want to let this go. And every part of my character was being challenged because these men were coming out of the woodworks. Now, before I started studying the Bible, I couldn't find a date. But when I started studying the Bible, people start coming out of the woodwork. Men who were, presidents of company, French, Italian, the whole bit. I had all of them coming, and I realized, you know what? If I pull back the mask, that's just Satan. But they all look really good on the outside. And I'm thankful that the women in my life were studying the Bible with me and helped me to come to deep convictions about purity.
That's fantastic, honey. Absolutely. I love it. I'm inspired, and I'm thankful that God saved you for me. When I think of purpose of life, you read this Acts passage. It says, now when David had served God's purpose in his own generation. we are here to serve God's purposes, not our own. And I appreciate Ruby's conviction to stay true to pursuing God in God's purpose for her life rather than our own individuals. You know, when I first became a Christian, I was dating a young lady that I had been dating for about 4.5 years. And she was very close to the family. Matter of fact, to this day, she's very close to my mom and my sister. They talk all the time. And I remember, you know, so I am, I get baptized and I'm in this dating relationship and I'm trying to figure out, well, hey, maybe, you know, should be open to the gospel and we'll see what can happen. And she wasn't. And you know, and I was like, wow, this is the one that I wanted to be with. How do we do this? And it was interesting. We didn't have the same purpose in life because, you know, when you, my dreams and my ambitions were very different than what hers were. You know, getting her around disciples, you know, going to church, it was like, okay, when are we out of here? She didn't like the song. She didn't like worship, didn't like the message, just, you know, or when we had a devotional that we would go to on a Friday night, she's like, why, like, what are we doing? Aren't we going to, you know, hang out and go back with our old friends? And my old friends, what we did wasn't right. Not to mention, even if she knew some of the things we did, she would not be happy. And so I was distancing myself. But the problem was, yeah, we were in this relationship. We cared about each other deeply. You think this is going to marriage, but we didn't have the same purpose. And it really, it just didn't work. Even though we were great friends, we wanted to be, but our purposes weren't the same, you know. And I'm trying to, like David, live out God's purpose in my life. And she wasn't. She was living out her purposes, hoping that God would help her reach her dreams and ambitions. It's different to go, no, God, equip me so that I may reach your dreams and ambitions for my life. That's a very different posture than one that says, God, help me reach my goals. And you can go on Facebook and see that. There's, oh, God's going to bless this. God's going to bless that. I'm claiming this. I'm claiming that. That's a very different approach than what we see that brings honor to God when you're going, God, what are your purposes for my life? And I saw that there was very different, very, very different. And I was like, yeah, we're great friends. We get along awesome, but our purpose was very different and it didn't work. I also dated and got married in the church, many know, prior to marrying Ruby. And you know, it was unfortunate. I remember I got married. She was a disciple. We got married. We dated. We held to all the standards of purity, and we got married. And I remember I was working for a company, doing very well. And we went over to my boss's house. He had this mansion of a house that was on like the back nine of a golf course. It was gorgeous, and he had a deck off his bedroom. And I remember we pulled in his driveway and the lights are all on the house and it's gorgeous. And she looked at me and she said, now that is how I want to live. And I was like, I don't want to live like that. I have no desire to live like that. I want to go to some third world country and proclaim the gospel message. And she was in the church. And I was like, she was like, what are you talking about? I go, I don't want that. And then she looked at me, she goes, do you want to drive around in a Jetta your whole life? And I go, I bought this car. I'm very happy with my Jetta. I said, I'm cool with that. I said, she was like, well, you got to understand, if you get a house like this, you can reach more people. And I said, you know what? I don't know if that's true or not, but I know that that's not the pursuits that I have. God has a purpose for my life. And here's someone who was in the church, but didn't have the purposes of God at the forefront of their life. And that marriage ended disastrously. And I'll share a little bit, but we'll move on to the second one. which is a foundational principle. Value what God values. I love the little statement. It says investing in something more precious than gold. And I love John 8 because this really exemplifies the heart of what Ruby and I are talking about when you think about dating. I mean, obviously you can think about all areas of your life, but tonight is about this dating or finding love and a relationship. Notice what John 8 says. In verse 29, it says, the one who sent me is with me. He has not left me alone, for I always do what pleases him. These are the lenses through which God is asking us to look at life, that in whatever decisions you're making about romance and relationships, always do what pleases God. You know, not what, well, God didn't say anything about this or that. No, what is admirable? What is excellent? What is praiseworthy? What is pleasing to God? So my wife will share, value what God values.
Yeah, it's, you know, again, now that I had made that decision, obviously God governed all of my decisions. And I, in fact, went steady a couple times in the church. Great men. They're married to other people now, but, you know, and I did come into the church when the singles ministry was the premier ministry at the time. And so there were a lot of single people and we were all finding each other. We were dating each other. It was a really incredible time for all of that. But even with all of that, it would take me 10 years from the time I studied the Bible at 25 to 35 before I got married. So there's lots of time in there for me to feel all kinds of things. One of the things I realized over time is maybe as without being a Christian, I wasn't really all that interested in getting married. I think I may have wanted it, but I didn't understand it at all. But once I was in the church, I saw marriages that flourished and, you know, this hope of having two people who had the same values and were coupled together. Wow, I really wanted that. More than anything, I wanted the word "the" in front of my name, because then you would be called the Joneses, the Mitchells, the was very important to me. And I was a single intern in the church here in Philadelphia with people I was 11 years older then. Can I tell you that coming into the church, one of the things I valued, if you will, was my age. And I thought, the one thing I don't want, God, is to marry someone younger than me. So that was one of my, you know, you may have some of those and I don't think this is, but just keep that in mind. But as I dated and I got to date this one brother and we broke up, and the other time I dated, we actually got engaged. And what I realized about the value system here is that we both were disciples, but he had a different value system that he was going after, and I had a different one. We were together trying to make it fit, but it really wasn't fitting. And I do remember praying a prayer. We have even got down to the point of being engaged because it was clear that our relationship wasn't going well. It wasn't honoring God in terms of our bickering with each other and all that was going on. And I prayed, God, make it painfully obvious if this is not the man I am to marry. Now, be careful what you pray and what you ask for, because God made it painfully obvious that this was not the man I was supposed to marry. And that I ended up breaking off my relationship, my engagement with him, and would go on to be, if you will, single again in the cesspool of single women who were looking for someone. And it was amazing how God worked even all of that out. But I do know that, the drive to want to get married and have the in front of my name, I needed to have God's value on what that was all about. So what I wanted to share with you guys, there is a journal that I kept while I was single, and there are many of them. And this is really being quite vulnerable to share this with you. And this is one of my prayers. I would write prayers to God about this. And I said, God, help me to resolve the issue of dating or relationships with brothers. Father, I'm frustrated with myself and with this issue. God, it's something I believe with all my heart that I want a relationship with a Christian man. Father, I want to have it. I won't have it any other way. I pray that my heart would never turn from you because of a man in the world. God, it is tempting to get anxious and to feel like it's hopeless, because it really takes incredible faith on my part. Father, I want the man that you would have for me, nothing more and nothing less. God, make it clear that even in all my doubt, that I believe that it's from you and he's just right for me. Now, I would go on, and at the time, I was thinking it was going to be somebody else. And if you go on and read this, I have names of brothers that a particular brother that I was really enamored with. But it just showed me where, and going back and looking at this, and this was written back in 1980. What's the scripture? What's the date on that? 1988, I think it was. 98. What was that? Sorry, yeah, 1988. This was an incredible time where I had no idea what God would do, but it helps me to see that my value was what God valued. And that was so important to me. And it would still take me years later to eventually be in this marriage with Chip. But to think that that was my focus helps me to understand, where and how studying the Bible, having those convictions, valuing what God values, helped me on this course to leading me to us.
I'm all the more thankful for you, babe. For me, when I think about just kind of my story on this value, I remember when I first became a Christian, there was October of 1986, and I'm dating this non-Christian, and I'm trying to live this life. And I remember my girlfriend she was at University of West Virginia, and she was gonna come visit me at UMass. And I'm like, hey, well, you gotta stay. You can't stay with me. You can stay with some sisters. And she was like, what is wrong? Like, have you lost your mind? Like, I'm going to stay with these strangers who, I mean, we had no values that were in common. The standard by which I had submitted myself to was totally different. When her and I got in a relationship, I had a different standard. And now all of a sudden, I've got this other standard, and I'm trying to persuade her to surrender to the same standard of Christ being Lord. And she believed in Jesus and went to church as a kid, no different than the next. But there were the values that would please God were not there. And so I'm trying to figure that out. But all the more, now all of a sudden, I'm this Christian at 20 years old. And I remember I was in this class, and the professor, very beautiful woman, graduate from Spelman, just gorgeous woman. And she found out I had a Corvette. And she said, I've never been in a Corvette. I'd love to go for a ride in your Corvette. And I'm not thinking anything. I've left the world. I'm like, oh, yeah, whatever. One day after class or whatever, I'll take you for a ride or something like that. And so she kept asking. I was like, all right. So I took her for a ride, and there was this place called Sugarloaf Mountain. It was a hill, and you ride up the spiral hill in the car and go up. It's beautiful. And I was taking her for a ride, and we get up there, and she's walking around. Oh, it's so beautiful up here. And she said, let me ask you a question. And I was like, what? And she's like, so your faith, I hear about your faith and this Christianity stuff. And she's just, all of a sudden just not being a professor. And she's like, surely you're not into this whole monogamous thing. Like, you don't just stick with one person. And I was like, oh my. And I'm sitting there going, I'm up here on a mountain. It's beautiful. She's looking at this Corvette, and I'm a Scooby snack. And I'm thinking, a 20-year-old professor, that's a dream for guys. You're just dreaming for a professor from Spelman who's beautiful, and all she wants is just a physical. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, what do I value? And I'm literally in the moment going, you know what? It's time to go. And I just said, let's go, get in the car. And that Corvette got back to the professor's class really fast. I was like, you got to get out. Okay. And, because the value system. I was struggling to go, man, I'm 20. I just want to do what is pleasing to God. I got a girlfriend who's a non-Christian. I got a professor who's coming after me. Then I got some other women that are saying things to me because they're testing to see if I'm really serious about being celibate. And I'm in this world trying to figure out, how do I find love in a relationship? And I knew that I had to find somebody that had the same conviction, that they wanted to do whatever was pleasing to him. Because when you have somebody that's doing that, it brings together a unity and an ability to function together that is profound in every way. And even with your difficulties and your arguments, they get worked out, because at the end of the day, you're not looking for your own desires and values and your own pleasure. You're looking to do whatever is pleasing to God, and therefore I can serve God. It's about this giving of self unto God that you may give to others. And I wanted to be with somebody who was willing to surrender themselves unto God, that they could be who they need to be for others. And that I hadn't found it. My first wife, it just didn't, it was terrible. When I first got into church, I hadn't seen, anyone from my culture. It was very different. And, I came up during the era of the Huxtables, and then that college movie that came out after them. And I was like, I want to marry somebody that looks like one of those college kids. And that's what my heart was drawn to. And a woman got baptized that kind of fit that mold and that look. And that was of great value to me. And then all I needed was a few disciples to say, yeah, that's the one. But at the end of the day, we were in a car together, and we were married, and we were going to some friends. And she looked at me, she said, let me tell you something. I have no desire to obey God like you. I have no desire to obey God's word. She said, you might as well just turn around and take me home. And I was like, this is over. Not because of a disdain or mad, but I knew our whole value system was now destroyed. And what I valued was no longer what she valued. What I was seeking to please was no longer what she was seeking to please. And it just can't work. And when I broke up with my girlfriend, when I became a Christian, I remember taking her home and saying, hey, we need to chat. And I remember saying, this isn't working. And she said to me, she said, I knew when you got baptized that was going to be the thing to end our relationship. Now listen at that the idea of me surrendering unto Christ would be the very thing that would end our relationship. And that spoke to the value system that was in our relationship prior to me becoming a Christian. And over the years, I've seen that. I've seen that. And, I think, what do you do with, I have some friends longtime friends that are single now, that were single with me years ago, but now are single. And they're in situations where they're trying to find love. And I've seen some struggle with the value system of trying. And I've seen people go on dating websites. They go, well, we're going to go on a dating website and put the net out there and see if I can rope somebody in, and then I can convert them, and then I can have love. Is that really purpose? Is that the value system that God puts forward? Is that really one that's admirable, praiseworthy? Is that what God would hold up as praiseworthy? When you think about it, you go, no, there's one brother, he got on it and he confessed it, that he went out, got on a dating site, found this woman, and they were going to meet up in a restaurant, and the woman comes in and she's a little person and he's 6'4", 270, and she's a little person. And he was like, oh no. and and so she's like 3 foot something and he's 6 something, and here they are walking down the street holding hands, and all he kept saying was, God is mocking me right now. And they sit down and they're having talk, and she says, well, what do you think? Do you like me? He goes, oh yeah. And she goes, well, what do you like about me? And he didn't know what to say. He said, your body. And I was like, it was just a disaster. But I said to him, I said, that's what you get, because you valued something. You went after something that's not what God is doing. And I know people say, well, I'm flirting to convert. I find that phraseology in the scriptures. I mean, really, I'm not here to say that it's not hard for folks to find love. It is, but we have to value what God values. We have to seek, because in the end, it will produce a fruit. I've seen folks that have gone out and they dated somebody and they converted them and gotten married, and you go, wow, see, it works. And then I saw 5 years later where that marriage is. There's been physical abuse and divorce. There's been adultery, emotional abuse. I mean, Ruby and I've seen 70 years collectively of these stories, and we get to see the end, because when that fire comes, if it's not built on those precious stones, it will burn it up and consume it. There have been people that come back to me. I remember years ago, a sister was angry with me because she was in this relationship that wasn't a great thing, and she wound up, they had some challenges with their life and purity, and some things didn't go well, and it was really bad. They wound up leaving the church with enormous amount of attitudes and things. And then 20 years later, maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 years later, they wanted to come back to the church, and they were getting restored. And she came to me and she said, I just want to apologize. I was wrong. You were right. And I said, no. I said, it's not about me being right. It's about, hey, you are coming back to God. I am just fired up. And she said, it was a lot, and it was terrible. And I just go, I don't care. I'm just fired up that you're back. And he got back, and he kept calling me saying, well, hey, let's talk. I said, I ain't got nothing to say, man. I'm just fired up you're back, and praise God for that. But it's the value system. And I think we've got to really hear that making decisions that pleases God. Let's move on to yoke yourself correctly. 2 Corinthians 6 is always talked about dating, but let's talk about 2 Corinthians 7. It's a great passage. It says, therefore, since we have these promises, dear friends, let us purify ourselves from everything that contaminates, listen at this, body and spirit. Body and spirit, perfecting holiness out of a reverence for God. Our pursuit of holiness is out of a reverence for God. Rubes, you want to share? Yoke yourselves correctly.
So in the pursuit of Chip, if I will, I said earlier that the age difference, or the age thing, was what I would not do. We're 6 years different. I'm 6 years older than Chip. And so when we first met each other, I didn't see Chip in that way. It's funny because I saw his friend, or another brother, but I didn't see Chip, and they were probably the same age, if not younger. But it's interesting because I was so in my mind what I thought I wanted. When I go back and read the description, and I will read this to you later, of the guy that I was praying to God for, it was Chip Mitchell. But I was praying with somebody else in mind. But the description I gave was exactly, you would think I was saying that about Chip. But being yoked together, I think when we were just trying to get to a place where we can get married, there were many, many, many challenges. One of which at one point we thought we were going to break up. We both were doing ministry together. We were working hard. And by the time the weekend came, Chip nor I had time for each other. We just wanted to sit on somebody's couch, watch a movie, have a meal because we were exhausted. And then the next day was Sunday. So we really didn't give to our relationship until we really got some help from a couple who was in our life, who asked some great questions to bring us back to, is this what you really want? Are you really going to get closer by doing it this way? And anyways, he gave both of us something to think about, and we decided to give it another try. But being yoked together is, if you're not yoked in the right way, it is a misery, because God tells us that we're one with that person, right? And it took a lot for Chip and I to become one in our early marriage, our early, that whole thing. But what I wanted to pull out is that what was important to me is that whoever I married had the same passion for God that I had. And again, listen to these things. And this was written back in this journal. It's old, it's kind of beat up. I still have it. But going back to September 18th, 1988. And here I go again. Father, please help me with my feelings on dating and marriage. I pray that you will get me ready for a relationship with a Christian man. Please make it clear to me and to him. And God, please be preparing his life for me. I pray, God, for a strong man who is able to lead in a dynamic way, a man who wants the ministry full time, a man devoted to friendships and relationships, a gentle man, a compassionate man, a supportive and humble man before God. Father, give me a mate that loves people, that loves righteousness, who loves children, who loves the lost with a passion. God, please give me a mate who is spiritually mature, a man who fears you, Father. Please give me a husband who is handsome, well-built, a neat dresser, a bright smile, and taller than me. Father, help him to be effective in making disciples and discipling and being discipled. And it goes on. But when I look back at that, I was describing Chip Mitchell. I had no idea that he would be that person, because I was so much older than him. I would never have looked at him in that way. But God brought us together, guys. The being yoked correctly is God's timing, having convictions about what you really want, and praying to God about those things. What I really love about Chip and I in our relationship is that we both love people and we love serving. God did give us the opportunity to work in the ministry full time. We've been doing that for many, many years now. But where it started and bringing it together, that was all God. If you heard our story and the different turns it took, because he got married, I was engaged to get married, and God would bring us back together, blows my mind. But I still say it's who you are yoked with. That is so important, because that means you become one with that person. And I'm grateful that I get to be one with Chip Mitchell.
And so am I, my darling. Although she didn't pray for, beautiful teeth. She prayed when we were pregnant with our son. God, please don't let him have my husband's teeth. I had buck teeth when I was a kid, because my head was much smaller than my teeth, and my teeth were grown. But my head finally caught up, which is awesome. This yoking together is really a big deal. 25 years now, Ruby and I, we finish each other's sentences. We understand each other's needs and wants. We understand our quirks. We understand our weaknesses. And that has only been forged together because of these earlier principles being in place right in our relationship. It didn't mean that we didn't have intense bumps and arguments, and we had a lot of that, intense ones. But because of our purpose, our value, our hearts could be mended together because we were yoked. We understood that we didn't want to contaminate our body nor our spirit with the things of the world. And I know that, there's this temptation to yoke ourselves or find ourselves in these romantic relationships with people that are not disciples. And I know what we generally say, well, they believe in Jesus. Well, 87% of the United States believes in Jesus. That's just fact. But do you have the same conviction about salvation? Because that's the real issue. It's not, do you believe Genesis is true or that Jesus came and died and rose again? You got to believe that, yeah. But do you have the same conviction about the plan of salvation? That's everything. Without salvation, what do we have? And I think so often it's easy to say, well, oh, this person believes in Jesus. Oh, we'll work it out because they're morally okay. The plan of salvation is twofold to it. One is who's saved and who's lost, right? Because God says clearly, you marry only a Christian. But the second part of that is so important that I think we miss is the aspect of repentance. You see, repentance brings forth a new purpose, a new value system. Without repentance, you won't have that heart that says, I'm here to fulfill God's dreams for my life. Instead, without repentance, you're like, no, I call on God to fulfill my dreams. That's very different. And we see that in Acts chapter 13 when they talk about David. Well, the value system, I'm looking for pleasures. Eli's sons saw sacrifices that were pleasurable to them. Eve saw that the fruit was pleasing to the eyes and good for food. So what did they do? They jumped on that instead of saying, I want to do what pleases God. And when you're yoked to someone who doesn't have that clear conviction on the plan of salvation, it doesn't work. You wind up in a tug of war about where you're going, how you raise your kids, how you interact with neighbors and friends. When you want to make your home a place where people can come and you can serve and give, and that doesn't work. When it comes to jobs and where you go and where you work, where you put your money. One of the real challenges I faced, I was making good money. I was married to my first wife, and I was giving very sacrificially. That was causing some real tension and challenges in my marriage. And well, what do you do with that? How do you manage that? But what was the problem? Well, we weren't yoked correctly. And it just brings a lot of heartache and suffering. It appears to be a storybook, but there's a lot of pain and suffering. The last one is stewardship of your heart. In Psalms 26, verse 2, it says, test me, Lord, and try me. Examine my heart and my mind, for I have always been mindful of your unfailing love and have lived, here's what I love, lived in reliance on your faithfulness. Stewardship of heart. Ruby?
Mm-hmm. Honey, I wanted to go back. I read something in the chat room about cesspool. That was a very bad word to use. So please, I apologize for that. I was thinking more of like the swimming around, but not in any derogatory way that I mean that about the sisters. So please forgive me. Thank you for putting that in the chat. I think as far as the stewardship of heart, God really is the one that protected my heart in the whole courtship and the dating. And that whole idea of the discipleship of heart, having God's heart about my dating relationship with Chip even when it came to breaking up, I was that, a man that I had moved to be in the same ministry with. We were dating, we've been discipled and all this, and then we were going to break up, and my heart was hurting. And I thought, you know what, if I break up with this man, I am not staying in this same congregation and watching him date other sisters. I will go back to Philly, because I moved to be with him in Boston. But I do remember just having the heart, God, you are in control. And my heart, though broken and not sure about all of this, I trust you. And so I think of God having really guiding my heart and my thoughts. It really helped that I had great relationships with women older, women who were in my same stage, women whose weddings I had been in. In fact, I was in 12 or 13 weddings before I ever got married. And even to the point where willing to let this relationship go if it wasn't right. And I waited for this relationship because I really wanted to do it God's way. I really wanted the man that God would have for me. When I look at Chip and my friendship, it was born out of, we both, was going through a divorce. I was going through, broke off my engagement, and we kind of became friends in misery. Misery Loves Company, right? And we were long distance, but through that we started to build. And then I had to get a conviction, because while Chip was separated from his wife, he was not divorced. And my heart was getting attached to him because we were becoming great friends over long distance. And I remember someone who was in my life said, listen, Ruby, you cannot continue to hold on to a hope of this relationship. The man is still married. Now, my heart was already there. But what I did do was go back, read the Bible, get my convictions. The stewardship of my heart was God's word, get my convictions. And I remember calling Chip and saying, I don't think it's good any longer that we have this kind of connection. Now, he kind of, whatever he felt on this end, but he respected that. And we didn't have any more time of talking together. As it turned out, we had a Women's Day, and Chip's mom, who lived in Philadelphia, wanted to come. And so he gave me the contacts with his mom. And so at this particular Women's Day, his mom was there with 12 of her friends. My mom and sister were there. And I had no idea she would be my future mother-in-law. But I look at how God was orchestrating all of this. And I thought, when God says, do it my way, and we take other turns, then we're responsible for those actions. But I was determined, and I held on, and I did think, God, how would this ever happen? Is he just going to call me one day and say, okay, I'm divorced? I said, no, that won't happen. I have to really let this guy go. And in the meantime, I started dating a guy who was in my ministry here in Philadelphia, and I was 11 years older than him. Remember the whole age thing? You talk about God humbling me. By the time I got married, I was like, God, listen, I don't care, just send him. I don't care how old he is. I'm no longer concerned about his age, But, I was 11 years older than this guy, and he was really trying to elevate himself to really date someone who was older. And I felt like I was being held back. He was a great brother, but I thought this just isn't right. In the meantime, Chip's divorce went through. I had no idea, but he called me one day and said, hey, I'm going to be in Philadelphia. I'd love to take you out when I'm there. And that's how his divorce had gone through. That's how I learned about his divorce going through. And when he finally came to Philadelphia, at this time, it was for a funeral, but he did take me out during that time. We went on our first date. And you know what I thought, brothers and sisters? This is a man that I could marry. And you know what I did? He took me to my staff meeting the next morning. He was going back to Boston, and I wrote in his day timer, I thank God for saving you for me. Closed it up, put it in his car, got out of the car. He later read it, and the rest is what we're living right now.
Yes, she did. I got down to the corner of the street and I was like, I gotta see what she wrote. I was like, oh, wow. I was fired up. I was so fired up. God worked it out. But you know, the thing that I think about with the stewardship is Ruby and I, our whole Christian life for 35 years, have had a team of people in our life testing and questioning our heart and our mind, helping to direct and guide any decisions that we've made in our life. And we've allowed that. And it has really brought us to this point. It was, and we've watched people who don't do that. And we see the end result of that practice of not really allowing your heart. And I love the latter part of this verse. It says, I have lived in reliance on your faithfulness. There's a yearning for something that you have not received, but yet you're relying on God's faithfulness. And that is, I remember when I was divorced and separated, and I was living in a basement with unfinished walls, concrete on a mattress, listening to Brian McKnight and crying out to God, just what has happened to my life? I have been faithful to you, and look at what you've done to me. I was so humiliated in my first marriage. I would go around, share my faith in Springfield, and people would say, if your church is so great, why is your wife running around here sleeping with everybody? Like, it was just that known. It was that prevalent. And I was just humiliated. But I just said, I'm going to trust God. I just, I'm going to stay yearning and crying, but I was hurt. I was crying. It wasn't a church service I didn't cry at. I mean, a Bible talk leaders meeting. I wasn't leading the Bible talk. They sent me to every meeting because they were afraid of losing me. But I was just crying out to God, and I allowed God to test my heart and my mind. And I allowed God's people to work it so that God could have his purposes fulfilled in my life. I'm going to end right there. And we're going to open it up, I guess, for some questions if you have any, or clarification on anything we share.